The knife stopped mid-cut when the phone rang. The sharp ringing sound sounded like a scream in the strange silence that dominated the room. My parents looked at each other, and my heart raced for no apparent reason, as if something was about to happen. I grabbed my phone from the table, my eyes still on my food. On the screen, Banco Nacional, urgent call. I answered, trying to sound normal, but the voice on the other end wasn't there to joke around. "Miss Elizabeth, we need to confirm some unusual activity in your parents' account. Frozen." I looked straight at my mother, then at my father. "Activity? What kind?" I asked, my stomach already churning. "Several withdrawals in a row and a transfer of $30,000 to an account in your name." I almost dropped the phone. My father stood up abruptly, his eyes fixed on me. "What is this, Elizabeth?" he said, his voice breaking. "Did you take our money?" My mother couldn't speak, just stared at me as if I were a stranger. The silence turned to judgment. I began to tremble. This was a nightmare, and I had no idea what was happening. "I never did that," I screamed, trying to defend myself, and that's when my brother, sitting nearby, opened his mouth with the calm of someone who already had a script prepared. "I suspected as much. She's been desperate for money ever since she lost her job." Each word was like a knife slowly stabbing me in. My father turned to him and said, "Did you know about this?" And he just nodded, as if confirming an old betrayal. The room had become a courtroom, and I was the only defendant. The dinner that began like any other turned into a circus of accusations, pain, and shock. My parents, confused and hurt, didn't know who to believe, and I stood there, completely bewildered, trying to understand how that money had ended up in my account. It was as if my world had been turned upside down in a matter of seconds, and I knew this was just the beginning. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. From that moment on, everything began to crumble like a house of cards, and what I didn't yet know was that my own brother was about to destroy much more than my reputation. My brother always knew how to play with words. Ever since we were little, he was the favorite, the smart one, the friendly one, the one who knew exactly what to say in front of our parents to sound like an angel. Me? I was always the more reserved one, the one who stayed in my room listening to music while he collected compliments. But even with our differences, I never imagined he could turn on me. The day after dinner, my parents asked me to stay away until everything was cleared up. I went to my friend Clara's house, unsure of what to do. "He set you up, Liz," Clara said, her expression hard. "That money, have you checked your account?" I rushed to open the bank app, and there it was, the $30,000. But I hadn't made the transfer. I knew that, but how could I prove it? Meanwhile, my brother was already spreading vitriol on social media. He posted cryptic phrases about betrayals that come from within, and liked comments that said I was never trustworthy. And my friends began to distance themselves. My uncles stopped responding to my messages. The shame spread faster than I could react. It was as if I were being erased from my own life. I returned to my parents' house a week later, with a bank statement and a promise to prove everything. My father wouldn't even look me in the eye. "It's not just the money, Elizabeth. It's the trust. If you needed it, why didn't you ask?" My mother wept softly. And my brother, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, just watched. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake them both and say, "He's lying." But it seemed my voice no longer held any value. The feeling of helplessness consumed me. How could someone who grew up beside me have done that? And why? What did he gain by destroying me like that? But deep down, I was beginning to understand. He wanted it all. The house, our parents' trust, the money. And to do that, I needed to be erased from history. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not yet. After that last visit, something shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but the anger began to grow. I couldn't let him destroy my life like that. Not after everything we'd been through. I grabbed my laptop and started building a timeline. I needed to understand every movement, every transaction. There was something wrong, something he hadn't anticipated, and I was going to find it. I spent hours analyzing the statements. I noticed the transactions began the day after I used his computer for an online job interview. That set off alarm bells. I called an IT technician and asked for help searching my email and app activity. Within hours, he found an access authorization issued from another IP address, my parents' house. And in one of the automatic backups, there were traces of a transfer made with my digital signature. He had cloned my access. He used my name, my fingerprint, my trust. I was shaking with rage. I called Clara and told her everything. "This is serious. It's proven he committed fraud," she said. For the first time, I felt I wasn't completely alone. I printed everything, organized the files, and created a folder. I knew it wouldn't be enough emotionally for my parents, but it was a start. It was something real, something he couldn't erase. Deep down, I knew it wasn't enough to show documents. I needed to show who he was when no one was looking. And then I remembered. My father had installed new cameras in the house, connected to the security app. If any footage showed him using my computer or talking about money, it could be the key. I went there in the middle of the night, using the excuse of picking up some old books, and accessed the security center through the app. And there, amidst the recordings, I found it. A video from 3 weeks before the dinner. He was sitting in his room, his laptop open, talking to someone on speakerphone. "She won't even notice. I just need the money before they find out." My brother, confessing. Anger gave way to a silent chill. I had what I needed. Now it was time to turn the tables. I returned to my parents' house on Saturday, at the same time we usually had lunch together. They weren't expecting me. When I walked in, my mother was startled, and my father stood up slowly. "What are you doing here, Elizabeth?" he asked, his voice low and tired. "I came to show you the truth, and you're going to watch it until the end," I replied, folder in hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I placed the laptop on the table and opened the files. I first showed the extracts, then the IP technical analysis, and finally, I opened the video. When his image appeared and the sentence came out of his mouth, my parents fell into absolute silence. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide. My father stared at the screen as if the ground had dropped out from under him. I just watched, trying to hold back tears. My brother walked into the room mid-recording. Seeing himself on video, he froze. "This doesn't prove anything," he tried to say, but his voice was no longer firm. My father stood up, furious. "How could you do this to your sister? To us?" My brother tried to explain himself, but now the truth was an unstoppable tsunami. His every word was just more mud in a flood of his own making. My mother began to cry uncontrollably. "You made us doubt our own daughter. You made us turn our backs on her." And there I was, heartbroken, feeling a bitter mixture of victory and loss. Because even with the truth out in the open, the damage was done, the wound was open, and it wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about family, about what he killed in all of us. My brother slammed the door shut without apologizing. Maybe he lacked the courage, or maybe he'd never truly repented. And there I was, sitting at that same table where it all began, looking at my parents and asking, "Do you believe me now?" They nodded, but no hug could erase what I felt that night. And yet, I wasn't alone anymore. Even with the truth exposed, I couldn't breathe properly. It was as if a huge weight still weighed down my chest. My parents were in shock, but they seemed more lost than remorseful. I wanted to feel relief, but all I could feel was emptiness. After all, where were they when I needed them most? Why was it so easy for them to believe him? In the following days, I received messages from family and friends saying they were glad everything was resolved, but none of them apologized. No one asked me how I was. As if all that pain could be erased with a phew. Thank goodness that was a lie. Clara was the only one who was truly there for me. She listened to me silently, without judgment. Sometimes that's all we need. My brother disappeared for a while. My parents said he needed to reflect. But reflect on what? The destruction he caused was real. The consequences fell upon me. I was fired. I lost friends, and I carried a scar that won't easily be erased. To this day, whenever I enter a place, I feel stares. I don't know if they're of pity, doubt, or simply cruel curiosity. I just know they hurt. My parents tried to get closer, but there was a chasm between us. They wanted to go back to normal, as if nothing had happened, but it wasn't possible. I had slept on Clara's floor, crying, while they slept peacefully, believing I was a thief. That memory still burns inside me. Forgiveness isn't a magic key. It takes time and sincerity, something I haven't yet felt from them. I decided to walk away, not out of anger, but out of survival. Sometimes, loving a family that doesn't protect you too much is a slow poison. I needed to heal. I went back to therapy, invested in myself, and looked for a job again. It was hard, not because of the market, but because of the experience. Every interview felt like an internal battle. I needed to convince the world that I wasn't what my brother tried to make me out to be. And that hurt more than any lie. 2 months passed without any news from him. Then one day, I got a call. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking. "Your brother, he's in the hospital." For a second, my heart froze. "What happened?" I asked, already feeling the anxiety rising like a hurricane. "He tried to take his own life," she replied. And in that moment, everything stopped. The anger, the hatred, the fear, everything went silent. I went to the hospital, even though I didn't know what to say. The journey seemed longer than usual. My mind revisited every word, every betrayal. But when I walked into that room and saw my brother there, pale, full of tubes, I felt something I hadn't expected. Compassion. Not an apology, not an immediate forgiveness, but a spark of empathy. Because lying there, he wasn't the villain. He was just broken. My mother was crying in the corner. My father was beside him, holding his hand. Neither of them knew I was coming in. When they saw me, silence fell. "He asked to see you," my mother whispered. I approached slowly. He opened his eyes, weak but alive. "I'm sorry, Liz," he said. "I wanted you to see me. I always wanted to be the best. But I was the worst." And for the first time, he cried. For real. Those words were like knives and healing at the same time. I didn't have a ready answer. I could only hold her hand and say, "You need to want to live, and if you do, I'll help you." And that was it. No grand declarations, just a bridge, fragile, but real. For the first time, we weren't on opposite sides. We were just trying to understand what was left. I left the hospital not knowing what would come next. But something had changed. The pain was still there, but there was room to rebuild. I don't know if I'll ever trust him again. I don't know if we'll ever be brothers again like before. But I know I don't want to carry any more hate. Not for him, not for anyone. Because the weight of it almost killed us. And I won't let it consume me anymore. After that day in the hospital, I started looking at the past with different eyes. Not to justify what he did, but to try to understand where so much resentment came from. I remembered so many times when my parents praised my grades and ignored his attempts to get attention. The jokes about him being second in the class. We grow up thinking this doesn't hurt, but it does. I thought about the constant comparisons, the demands, the times he'd say, "One day you'll appreciate me," and no one took him seriously, not even me. Maybe he learned to smile on the outside and seethe on the inside. Maybe it was all a twisted cry for help, but that doesn't erase what he did to me. The pain he caused was real, the losses, irreversible, and pride, that's what dragged us all down. My parents were also trying to get back on their feet. My father began talking to me more carefully again, as if treading on glass. My mother began writing letters. Yes, letters, telling me how sorry she was for not standing up for me. I read them all, wept silently, but still couldn't bring myself to respond. Forgiveness isn't a button, it's a path, and theirs was still under construction. Clara said I was different, stronger, more determined, and maybe she was right. When you're thrown into the deep end and survive, something inside you changes. You can no longer accept crumbs of respect. You can no longer pretend that family automatically equals unconditional love. You start choosing yourself. And that's not selfishness. It's necessity. Over time, I came to accept that my brother might never be the same, that I wouldn't be either. But that didn't mean everything had to end in ruin. There was a chance, small, fragile, to rebuild, as long as everyone was willing, as long as he understood that love isn't about possession nor competition, and that trust, once broken, only recovers with great effort. After weeks, my brother left the hospital and went straight to a mental health rehabilitation clinic, of his own free will. That, in itself, was a huge step. He said he needed to understand why he'd gone so far, and that he'd only leave when he was ready to be a better person. I wanted to believe him, part of me still skeptical, but another part silently hoped. While he was undergoing treatment, my parents proposed a meeting. We sat in their living room, the same one where it all began. The atmosphere was tense, but respectful. "We want to apologize, truly," my father said, "for doubting you, for not protecting you." My mother held my hand, tears in her eyes. For the first time, I saw true, unguarded repentance. I responded honestly. I said I was still hurt, but I was open to starting over, with new rules, with boundaries. "If this is going to work, it needs to be different," I said. "I need to be treated like an adult, not like a problem that needs to be solved. They agreed. It was difficult, but liberating. For the first time, I felt like I was being heard. I created new spaces for myself. I started writing about everything I'd experienced. My writing went viral on several platforms. People across the country identified with what I told. Stories of brothers who were hurt, families who remained silent, silences that kill. It was impressive to see how many people carried similar pain. It gave me strength. It made me feel less alone. And even if nothing else worked, I knew I had something no one could take from me. My truth. It was my armor, my voice. And now, it echoed loudly, because what my brother tried to destroy rebuilt me even stronger, and best of all, in my own way. It was on a gray afternoon, almost 2 months after he left the clinic, that my brother sent me a message. "We can talk?" I felt my heart race. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to run away, but another part, perhaps the more tired part, wanted to hear what he had to say. We met at the cafe we used to hang out at as teenagers. Ironic, I know, but perhaps necessary. When I arrived, he was already there, thinner, quieter. His eyes looked different, tired, but clear. He stood up and gave me a shy hug. I stiffened. I still wasn't sure I was ready for this. We sat down. The silence was heavy, but he broke it first. I didn't come to justify myself. I came to own up. I did all that because I envied you, and because I didn't know who I was without competing with you. His words were like a punch. Part of me expected tepid apologies, cheap excuses, but he was naked there, emotionally, and he continued. "Seeing you trust me after I lied, it destroyed me inside. And the worst part is, I felt powerful. That's why I needed treatment, because I understood that I was a risk not only to you, but to myself. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or leave. All I could say was, 'You broke me.'" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know, and maybe you'll never forgive me, but I'll spend my whole life trying to fix this." The honesty hurt more than the venom he'd spewed earlier, because this time, it was him bleeding in front of me, and it was real. It was cruel, but it was the beginning of something. I left that cafe with my chest burning. There was no forgiveness in that encounter, but there was truth, and that for me was already a relief. Not for him, but for me, because I needed to stop carrying everything alone. I needed to say, "I know what you did, and yet I choose to let go of this pain." Over time, news of the truth spread. My parents began telling their family what really happened. Most were in shock. Some apologized, others disappeared altogether, and honestly, it was better this way. When you go through an emotional earthquake, you learn to recognize who is truly willing to rebuild with you. My brother started giving lectures at rehabilitation centers. He talked about envy, family pressure, and the mistakes he'd made. Sometimes I'd watch from afar, in secret. Watching him tell our story from his perspective was strange. It was painful, but also necessary, because he didn't shy away from what he'd done. He showed the consequences, and that was a step many people never take. I went back to working in marketing and started my own social media channel. I told real stories, like mine. With each video, I received hundreds of messages. People said, "This saved my relationship with my sister," or, "Now I understand why my daughter distanced herself. This healed me more than any therapy." It was like transforming pain into something useful. Today, my relationship with my parents is more mature. We still have wounds, but we're trying. Respect has become the foundation, and trust, something we all need to earn again. My brother and I, we're still distant, but there's communication. There's a boundary, and there's something I thought would never return for a long time: humanity. Not every story of betrayal ends in complete reconciliation. Sometimes it ends in individual reconstruction, in inner peace. And that, for me, is enough. Because after nearly losing everything, I learned the truth sets you free, but self-love is what saves you. As the channel grew, I was invited to appear on a local TV show. They wanted me to share my story live. At first, I was hesitant. Exposing my pain so directly scared me. But then I thought about how many people might be experiencing something similar, and I decided that if my voice could be a source of support, then it needed to be heard. In the studio, minutes before going on air, my hands were shaking. Clara was with me, holding on tight. "Remember why you're here," she said. "You survived. Now it's your turn to transform." When the camera turned on, I took a deep breath and began speaking. I told everything, without dramatizing, but without hiding anything. I looked into the lens as if I were looking into the eyes of someone who had been disbelieved by the one they loved most. During the broadcast, the show began receiving live calls. Mothers, brothers, and daughters expressed their emotion. One young man cried on air, saying, "My sister was also called a thief. I never apologized. I'm going after her now." At that moment, I felt something profound. My suffering had become a bridge. It wasn't just my pain, it was ours. When I left the studio, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Among the messages, one froze me. It was from my brother. I watched the whole thing. "You were brave. I'm proud of you." I read it silently. For the first time, I felt like maybe he was beginning to understand. It wasn't about cleaning up his image. It was about owning up to one's mistakes and recognizing the strength of those who were hurt by them. From that moment on, I realized my mission had changed. I was no longer fighting just to clear my name. I was fighting so that others wouldn't have to go through the same thing without support, without a voice, without justice. What began as a personal nightmare was turning into a movement, and this shift was bigger than I imagined. The following spring, my mother invited me to dinner. It was the first time since the incident that she had done something so intimate. She cooked my favorite meal, set the table as before, but this time, there was a different care in the air. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past. It was an invitation to acknowledge the present. We sat, just the two of us, in silence for a few minutes. She handed me a small box. Inside was a necklace that had belonged to my grandmother. She said this necklace should go to whoever supported the family when it was in ruins. My mother said, her voice breaking. "And now I understand. It was always you." I was speechless. It wasn't about the object. It was about the recognition I'd waited my whole life for and never thought would come. I cried. She cried too. And in that crying there was no resentment. There were scars. Marks of a time that will never return. But that shaped us. She apologized again. For the pain, for the doubt, for the emotional absence. And this time, I accepted. Because there, face to face, we weren't just mother and daughter. We were two women trying to heal from each other. And that was liberating. After that dinner, our relationship changed. More honest, more transparent. No more pretense of a perfect family. My father also approached me calmly, offering to help with my channel, trying to understand what I was doing. Small gestures, but full of meaning. My brother, on the other hand, was still in his own process. There were still open wounds, but he was trying, and that was more than I ever expected. I finally understood that starting over isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without drowning. It's about moving forward even with a scarred chest. Because it's not the absence of pain that defines our strength, it's what we do with it. And I decided to transform mine into words, into impact, and into hope. A year later, I received a notice from the bank. The fraud case had been officially closed and my name cleared. It seemed like just a piece of paper, but for me, it was like breathing for the first time in months. I kept that letter as a silent trophy. Not because I needed to prove anything to anyone, but because it was the end of a cycle. My brother called me that same day. He said, "You won." But I replied, "It wasn't a competition. It was survival." On the other end, he was silent, and perhaps he truly understood that the destruction he caused forced me to be stronger. But it also cost us dearly. It cost us our childhood, our trust, our bond. Clara organized a meeting with some of the channel's followers, women who had been through similar stories. Listening to them, I realized that no family is perfect, but some choices hurt forever, and forgiveness is sometimes more about moving on than forgetting. I felt like my pain now had a purpose. It was a shield, a flashlight, not a burden. My parents were there too, sitting in the audience, emotional, listening to each story. I saw them crying when I told them about the night at the dinner. And there, amidst so many stories, I understood. Sometimes, the forgiveness we need most is the one we give ourselves. For the guilt of having trusted too much, for the pain of having remained silent, for the strength that only came when everything fell apart. It was that night that I realized I no longer wanted revenge, justice, or applause. I wanted peace, and that peace I was finally building, brick by brick, word by word. No rush, no pressure, because surviving is a victory, but truly living is a new beginning. Today I look back with a mixture of pain and gratitude. It hurt, a lot, but every step, every fall brought me here. I'm no longer the same girl who trembled in the face of accusations. I'm a whole woman, with visible scars, but standing tall. And no one can take that away from me. Not my brother, not the past. The channel has grown more than I imagined. I wrote a book about my story. I receive messages every day from people saying, "You helped me forgive," or "You gave me the courage to speak up." And that moves me, because transforming pain into a bridge is a form of love. Love for myself, for others, for the life I chose to rebuild. My brother keeps trying. Sometimes we talk, other times we don't. There's still distance, but there's respect. And that, after all, is a lot. My parents are more present, more caring. They learned the hard way that love without listening becomes abandonment. And today, we try. Every day, truly. I don't pretend everything is healed. It isn't. But I've learned to live with what's left. And that's freedom. The silence that once destroyed me is now my space of peace. The absence I once cried out for is now just part of the journey. Because growing up, that's what it is. It's accepting that not everything goes back to the way it was, but we can still be happy with what's left. And if you've made it this far, remember this. Sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply not giving up on yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. And if it touched you in any way, today I understand. My story isn't about what my brother did to me. It's about what I did with the pain he caused. I rebuilt. I got up. I chose myself. And even with scars, I move forward. Because nothing, not even the greatest betrayal, is greater than the courage to start over. I learned to set boundaries, to say no without guilt, to love without erasing myself. My brother is still on his path, and I'm on mine. I don't know if we'll ever be close, but today, that no longer defines me. What defines me is my strength, my truth, and the love I had for myself when no one else did. Pain transformed me, lies taught me, and loneliness strengthened me. Today I live with more calm, more clarity, more faith, not in those around me, but in myself. And that is freedom. True freedom. If you're going through something similar, don't forget this. You deserve to be heard, respected, believed. And above all, you deserve to start over, in your own time, at your own pace. Subscribe to the channel, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below where you're listening. I'll respond to each one with love. Until next time.